March 14, 1979, Brooklyn, New York. The wind cuts through Bath Beach like a blade. Streetlights flicker. A black Cadillac idles at the curb, engine low, patient. Inside a narrow row house, a man paces. Anthony Tony Glass Ricci. Associate, small earner, big mouth. He wasn't supposed to matter. At 9:42 p.m., a knock hits the door. 3 times, slow, certain. Ricci freezes. He already knows. When the door opens, there's no shouting, no struggle. Just 2 men in dark coats, calm faces, empty eyes. Neighbors will later say they heard nothing. No gunshots, no screams. Only the sound of a car door closing. Tony Glass disappears that night. No body is ever recovered. No report is ever filed. But the reason wasn't money. It wasn't territory. It wasn't even business. Weeks earlier, in a smoke-filled back room, Ricci made a mistake so small it sounded like nothing. He threatened the wrong man. Not a boss, not a capo, a brother. And in the world of the Bonanno family, blood outranked everything. Anthony Ricci was never supposed to be important. He grew up in South Brooklyn, tight streets, narrow loyalties, the kind of neighborhood where names carried weight and silence carried more. Ricci had neither. By his early 20s, he was already orbiting the edges of organized crime. Not inducted, not trusted, just useful. He ran errands, collected small debts, delivered envelopes he never opened. An associate. That word meant everything and nothing. He wasn't protected, he wasn't recognized, but he was close enough to power to feel its heat. And that was the problem. Ricci wasn't patient. He talked too much, laughed too loud. He mistook proximity for permission. In rooms where others listened, he spoke. In situations where others lowered their eyes, he held contact a second too long. Men noticed, but they tolerated him for a while, because Ricci made money. Small money, but consistent. And in the late 1970s, the Bonanno family needed stability more than pride. Years earlier, the family had been fractured. Internal conflict, leadership struggles, exile. The name Bonanno had lost its certainty in New York's criminal hierarchy. Now it was being rebuilt, carefully, quietly. And at the center of that fragile restoration stood a different kind of power. Not loud, not public, untouchable. Salvatore Bonanno. He held no flashy title on the street, no official position announced in smoky rooms, but everyone understood his value. He was blood, brother to the boss. In that world, titles could change, alliances could shift, capos could fall overnight. But blood did not negotiate. Salvatore didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to prove himself. His authority wasn't earned, it was inherited, protected, and absolute. Men greeted him differently, stood straighter, spoke carefully. Even made men lowered their tone around him. Because disrespecting him wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge to the entire structure holding the family together. Ricci didn't understand that. To him, Salvatore was just another man in the room, older, quieter, reserved, not dangerous, not until it was too late. In the Bonanno family, there were rules written nowhere but enforced everywhere, and the most important one was simple. You could cheat a man, you could lie to a man, you could even steal from a man, but you could never threaten blood. Ricci was about to learn the difference. Anthony Ricci didn't rise because he was respected. He rose because he was useful. By 1976, he had carved out a small but steady presence in South Brooklyn. Nothing spectacular,
No headlines, no whispers of greatness, just work. Numbers rackets, small loans, street collections. The kind of operations that never made the newspapers but kept envelopes moving upward. Every week, money traveled, from gamblers to collectors to soldiers to capos and eventually to the top. Ricci was somewhere near the bottom of that chain, an associate, close enough to earn, not close enough to belong. But proximity changes a man. He started getting invited into back rooms, not to speak, but to listen. Card games, late-night meetings, quiet negotiations over debts and favors. He watched how power moved, not through shouting, through silence. A nod, a glance, a name mentioned once and never again. This was the real structure of organized crime. At the base were associates like Ricci, replaceable, expendable. Above them, soldiers, made men, protected by oath and blood. Then capos, crews of earners under their control, and above them, the boss, the final word. But there was something else, something not written into the hierarchy. Blood ties. They existed outside the system, untouchable by rank, immune to challenge. Ricci saw all of this, but misunderstood it. He believed access meant acceptance. He started talking more, joking with soldiers, speaking during meetings where he was meant to stay quiet, dropping names he had no right to use. At first, it was ignored. Then it was noticed. But Ricci kept earning, and money delays consequences. He expanded his operations, took on riskier collections, handled disputes others avoided. He became known not as a leader, but as someone willing to push boundaries. That reputation grew. So did his confidence. Too much of it. Because in that world, there was an invisible line every associate lived beneath. You could rise, you could earn, you could even become valuable, but you could never forget your place. Ricci didn't just forget it, he stepped over it. And worse, he did it in front of the wrong people. The Bonanno family was watching him now, not as an asset, but as a problem waiting to happen.
It wouldn't take long. One argument, one moment, one sentence said too loudly. That's all it ever took. It happened on a Thursday night, late autumn 1978. A back room in Bensonhurst, smoke thick enough to blur faces, cards on the table, cash stacked in quiet piles. This wasn't a meeting. It was a test of discipline. Men came here to relax, but they never forgot where they were. Ricci did. The problems started small. A debt. One of Ricci's gamblers had fallen behind. Not unusual, but the man had connections, distant but real, the kind that required caution. Ricci didn't believe in caution. He pressed harder. Threats, pressure, public embarrassment. The gambler panicked and went to someone for protection, Salvatore Bonanno. Not because he ran the operation, but because his name carried weight no one questioned. Word spread quickly. A quiet request was made. Ricci should back off, handle it differently, respect the line. That should have been the end, but Ricci took it personally. To him, this wasn't about hierarchy, it was about pride. So he walked into that back room knowing Salvatore would be there, and he waited. The moment came between hands, conversation low, eyes watching without appearing to. Ricci spoke first, too loudly, too directly. He mentioned the debt, the interference, the misunderstanding. Salvatore didn't react, not immediately. That was the warning. In that world, silence wasn't weakness, it was judgment. But Ricci kept going. He stepped closer, broke distance, broke tone. Then he said it, a sentence so simple it barely sounded like a threat. If your brother wasn't who he is, this would be handled already. The room froze. No shouting, no sudden movement, just stillness. Because everyone understood what Ricci didn't. He hadn't just insulted a man, He had questioned the only thing that could never be questioned: blood. Salvatore didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't respond at all. He simply looked at Ricci, then looked away. The game resumed. Cards dealt, chips moved, conversation returned. But something had already been decided. In that moment, Ricci stopped being an associate. He became a liability. And in the Bonanno family, liabilities were removed. Quietly, permanently. On the surface, it was nothing. No blood spilled, no weapons drawn, no public scene. Just a sentence spoken in the wrong room. But inside the Bonanno family, that sentence moved faster than any bullet. Because this wasn't about Tony Ricci anymore. It was about control. By the late 1970s, the Bonanno family was still recovering from years of instability. Internal fractures had weakened its position within New York's 5 families. Rivals had watched closely. Some had already taken advantage. Respect had to be rebuilt, carefully, quietly, without visible cracks. And respect in that world wasn't maintained through kindness. It was maintained through consistency. Rules had to mean something, especially the unwritten ones. Ricci hadn't just disrespected Salvatore, he had challenged the protection surrounding the boss's bloodline. If that went unanswered, it wouldn't stay isolated. Other associates would notice. Soldiers might start testing boundaries. Capos could begin questioning authority behind closed doors. And once doubt entered the structure, it spread. Slowly at first, then all at once. That was the real danger. So the conversation moved upward. Quiet meetings, no records, no witnesses. Capos discussed it carefully, not as an emotional reaction, but as a strategic necessity. Could it be ignored? No. Could it be forgiven? Not without consequence. Because forgiveness in this context would look like weakness, and weakness invited challenge. The Bonanno leadership understood something fundamental. Power wasn't about how loudly you responded. It was about whether anyone believed they could get away with crossing you. Ricci had crossed a line that protected more than a man. It protected the structure itself. There was another layer to consider: the commission. Even in its weakened state, the governing body of the 5 families still represented balance. Open instability inside one family risked drawing attention from others. If the Bonannos appeared divided or unable to control their own associates, it could justify outside interference, or worse, opportunistic aggression. So this had to be handled internally, cleanly, without noise, without questions, no drawn-out punishment, no public spectacle, just removal. A solution that solved everything at once. Restore discipline, reinforce hierarchy, send a message without saying a word. By the end of the week, the decision was no longer being debated. It was being arranged. Tony Ricci would not be warned. He would not be confronted again. Because in that world, once a decision reached that level, the outcome was already final. Ricci still thought he had time. He didn't realize the system had already moved past him. At first, nothing changed. That's what made it dangerous. Tony Ricci still moved through the same streets, same bars, same backrooms. The same faces nodded when he walked in. But something underneath had shifted. Subtle, controlled, invisible unless you knew what to look for. Phone calls took longer to return. Then they stopped. Meetings he was usually invited to happened without him. Explanations were always casual, dismissive, last minute, nothing important, next time. Ricci believed it.
Because he needed to. In his mind, the situation had already passed. No retaliation, no confrontation, no consequences. He told himself it meant nothing. But in that world, silence didn't mean forgiveness. It meant process. Behind closed doors, the conversations were different. Capo spoke in careful tones, not about anger, but about order. The decision had already been made in principle. Now it was about execution. Clean, quiet, contained. No unnecessary exposure, no disruption to business. Ricci's name was no longer discussed as a man. It was discussed as a problem to be resolved. Even the men closest to him understood. Distance became survival. Associates who once stood beside him began stepping away. Not openly, not dramatically, just enough. Enough to avoid being included in what was coming. Because proximity in moments like this could be fatal. Ricci noticed, but misread it. He thought it was politics, temporary tension, maybe jealousy. He tried to compensate, talked louder, acted bolder, showed presence where it wasn't welcome anymore. He was trying to prove he still belonged, but belonging had already been taken from him. The final step was simple: control his movement. One of the soldiers, someone Ricci trusted, reached out with an opportunity. A meeting, small job, easy money, nothing unusual. That's how it always happened. No threats, no suspicion, just routine. Ricci agreed without hesitation, because in his world saying no meant weakness, and he still believed he was being tested. In a way, he was, but not for loyalty, for timing.
By the time Ricci walked toward that final meeting, the decision was no longer in motion. It was complete. All that remained was the moment. March 14, 1979, 9:42 p.m. Tony Ricci steps out into the cold. The street is quiet. Too quiet for Brooklyn, but he doesn't question it. He's been here before. Same block, same routine. A black Cadillac waits at the curb, engine running. Inside, 2 men. One of them he recognizes. That's enough. Ricci opens the rear door and slides in without hesitation. No greeting, no small talk, just the sound of the door shutting behind him. The car pulls away slowly. No sudden movement, no urgency. Inside, the air is heavy. Ricci starts to speak, something about the job, the money, the details. No one answers. He senses it then. Too late. A hand moves from the front seat, quick, controlled. A wire, thin, precise. It loops around his throat before he can react. No shouting, no struggle that lasts more than seconds. Just pressure, tightening, relentless. The second man holds his arms down, efficient, practiced. Ricci's body fights, but the system doesn't, because this isn't personal. It's procedure. Within moments, it's over. Silence returns to the car, the same silence that followed his words weeks earlier. They don't rush, they don't panic. The body is handled with care, not respect, but control. Wrapped, concealed, no blood, no mess, no evidence. The Cadillac disappears into the Brooklyn night, moving through streets that have already forgotten him. By morning, Tony Ricci is gone. No witnesses step forward, no reports filed, no questions asked, because everyone who needed to know already understood. This wasn't a murder, it was a correction. A line had been crossed, and now it had been erased. By sunrise, nothing remained. No crime scene, no witnesses, no record that Tony Ricci had ever stepped into that car. On paper, he was still alive. On the street, he was already gone. People asked, quietly at first, anyone seen Tony? He around? The answers came just as quietly. Shrugs, half smiles, a simple phrase that ended the conversation every time. He's gone. No one pressed further.
Ricci's operations were absorbed within days, his small loans redistributed, his collections reassigned. Money continued to flow as if nothing had happened. That was the point. No disruption, no ripple. Inside the Bonanno family, the message moved faster than any rumor, not through meetings, not through announcements, through absence. Men who had been in that back room weeks earlier didn't speak about it, but they adjusted. Tone softened, boundaries respected, jokes disappeared where they didn't belong. Because they had seen the cause, now they understood the consequence. No one mentioned Salvatore's name in that context again, not even indirectly. The decision had done what it was meant to do. It restored something that couldn't be measured in money. Certainty. There was no debate about authority anymore, no quiet testing of limits, no curiosity about what could be said, or to whom. The line had been redrawn, and everyone could see it. Even beyond the Bonanno family, the effect settled in. Other crews heard the story, but only in fragments. An associate disappears. No noise, no trace. Timing too precise to be a coincidence. That told them enough. The Bonannos weren't fractured. They were disciplined, controlled, capable of acting without hesitation and without spectacle. In organized crime, that kind of reputation was more valuable than fear, because fear fades. But certainty? Certainty endures. Tony Ricci was never officially mourned. No funeral, no retaliation, no revenge. Because there was nothing to avenge. He hadn't been wronged. He had been corrected. And in that world, corrections didn't require acknowledgement, only silence. March 14th, 1979. A door opens, a man steps inside a car, and disappears without a sound. No witnesses, no evidence, no trace. But the real moment didn't happen in that car. It happened weeks earlier, in a quiet back room. One sentence, one miscalculation. Tony Ricci believed power was proximity. He believed being close to it meant he could speak freely around it. He was wrong. In organized crime, power isn't what you see. It's what you are never allowed to touch. Salvatore Bonanno never raised his voice, never issued a threat, never demanded respect, because he didn't need to. The structure demanded it for him. That's the truth this story leaves behind. In that world, violence is not chaos. It is order. Every action serves a purpose. Every silence carries meaning. Ricci wasn't killed for what he did. He was removed for what his actions represented. A crack in the system, a question without permission. And questions like that don't get answered. They get erased. Because in the end, the Mafia doesn't fear loud enemies. It fears small moments of doubt. And it eliminates them before they can speak again.